Shaun Haney here with RealAgriculture.com, Real Ag Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. We're at the Top Producer Summit in Kansas City, Missouri, and we're joined by longtime friend of Real Agriculture and a local here in Kansas City. It is Drew Lerner. Drew, how are we doing?
I'm good. It's good to have you on my turf for a change.
That is very correct. The weather, man. First of all, locally here, it's been cold in Missouri. What is going on?
Yeah, you know, I was up in Canada a week ago, and I think it all came with me.
It's your fault.
Yeah, it was, minus 31, and I was in Edmonton.
Yeah.
And it was very cold. But, all this is coming from up your way, and for this part of the world, they don't like it, you know.
No.
And here we've got more moisture in the air, so when we get cold in this part of the world, it hurts a little bit more. I love your cold. I hate this cold.
I've got two sons that are in North Dakota going to school, and it was minus 38 yesterday, which, of course, at minus 40, that's where Fahrenheit and Celsius connect.
That's right.
It's cold either country when it's that cold.
That's right.
I guess you look at the overall North American weather pattern heading into spring here.
Yeah.
Optimistic, concerned, just kind of give us the lowdown here.
It really depends on where we are talking about. I'm very excited about Canada this year, at least in the southwestern prairies. I think we're at the end of the 8-year drought, and we're going to get some break. Now, we'll go back and forth a little bit this year, but I think it's going to get better up there. It's going to get better in the northern plains for a little while as well, probably in the spring. I don't know that we can take it all the way through the summer, but nonetheless, better situation for those guys. In the U.S., here in the central part of the country, there's a potential we might get a little dry a little later in the year. You know, we're not doing real well on moisture in this part of the world right now.
Yeah.
And that cold air that comes in from Canada, you know, there's no moisture up there, up your way. So when it comes down in this part of the world, it doesn't bring any moisture. So places like Iowa and Minnesota and Nebraska and neighboring areas are really running a little short on moisture. And there's still a drought prevailing in some of those areas. The longer we keep the northwesterly flow going, the higher the potential is that we're going to come into spring dry in some of these areas. My concern is once the cold air runs out, Mother Nature will switch it around and we'll get really warm. And if there's not a good transitional period there, we could go into warm and dry instead of cold and dry.
A lot of ranchers on the western half of the U.S. What do you see on that side of the country?
Yeah, you know, I think that from a ranching perspective, most of the situation right now is a little tenuous. I think there's been a lot of yakety-yak about the La Nina and negative PDO and it being dry out there, and but we got to keep in mind that it did rain fairly well in November last year, and so there's moisture down deep in the ground. We just need a one or two storm system to come across the area, moisten up that topsoil, and we're going to end up with much better grazing conditions. But that's the big concern. That northwest flow isn't going to help generate that very well.
Northeast and, I should say central and eastern Canada. What's your, early prognosis there?
A lot of cold still yet to come.
Really?
Yes.
Because they've had a lot of snow, Drew.
Yeah, I know. Ontario, Quebec, I think it's going to be kind of a challenging spring. A lot of cold air coming at times. We'll warm up and then we'll get cold again. I'm afraid we may get some false starts on some of the crop.
Ooh, that could be chilly. That could be chilly for corn.
It could be chilly for corn. It'd be a little delay in planting. It could also hurt some of the wheat crop if it gets going a little bit too soon. So I'm a little concerned about that part of Canada. For the prairies, I think prairies, it's going to be a good mix. There is a potential for some dryness in the eastern part of the area.
So when I've talked to some other people that are providing weather forecasts, I'm sorry I cheated on you.
I'm hurt. I'm really hurt.
One of the things that I have heard, I'm curious on whether you agree with it or not, is Western Canada will have moisture early, but concerned about an early shutoff, earlier than last year, potentially. Do you see it differently?
It could be that way, but I don't think so. I think it'll be similar to last year. We will do well in the spring. We will be wetter than we were last year in the spring in parts of the region.
Prairies will take that.
Yeah, I know they can. Especially the area that I think will be wettest is going to be the area that's been driest. So they'll absorb that and really do well with it. But there could be a little bit of planting delay, and so that may get some people a little bit worked up. But yeah, I do think there's a potential for some dryness later in the year. Right now, the way it looks to me, the northeast half of Saskatchewan and Manitoba probably have the biggest risk of being a little dry bias as we get into the heart of summer. A lot depends on what happens to the dryness in the states. Because if we end up with a dry spring here, conditions in the atmosphere are going to support ridge building, and it may end up being more in the middle of North America because of that dry bias, and so that could work its way up and hit eastern parts of the prairies.
So when we have ridge building, is that a situation where it locks in the condition, or what happens when you say ridge building?
Yeah, there's just an ordinary ridge that comes and goes, and then there's the big super ridges that do lock in for a long period of time. Those years that we get the super ridges that are really intense, they get locked in, usually pretty unique situations. A lot of the drought years we've had here recently in the western part of Canada, was part of a blocking weather pattern. The year ahead looks a little less blocky for Canada, but more so maybe in the U.S. plains. So the top of the ridge will get wiped out once in a while, and that'll bring rain to the prairies, while the base of the ridge over the plains and western Corn Belt might cause more persistent dryness.
Hey, in the Midwest, dry August, back into the growing season, not great for soybeans, and we'll be asking questions about, does the corn have enough to get to the end?
Right now we're a little concerned about whether that would be the case on corn because of this drier bias that's already in Iowa and Nebraska and some neighboring states. There is a drought that's still underway. With the northwest flow, we're not getting good storm systems. Now, when we warm up here, probably in April, we'll get a couple of storms that will come along and bring some moisture, which will help the planting, but it's not going to fix the deep subsoil moisture deficits, and that sets the stage for drier bias later in the summer, maybe.
Is there a year, I love these, I love asking, is there a year that this reminds you of from our past?
Not anything that jumps off the charts, but there are a number of years that I'm looking at. Years like 1971, 2007, I believe 1989 and 1953. Those are all years that I'm looking at, and there's a 1968 thrown in there too. I know I'm just blowing these years.
53, a good year. My parents were born in 53. Yeah, okay. Was it a good year for crops?
In Canada, it was wet. It was pretty wet, especially in the spring, and the U.S. had a drier bias, and that's why 53 kind of looks a little bit interesting right now. It wasn't just crazy wet all the way through the prairies all summer long, but it was a wetter year, and I tend to not want to go fully with 1953, but a piece of it, a flavor of it, might come with us.
And that's an important caveat, is that those are like guidelines. There's a potential for the setup for those years to be similar to this year, but don't take it as like the gospel in terms of it rained on the June 15th of 53, so therefore it will in 2025.
Yeah, you don't want to do that.
Yeah.
These are just guidances. We look for something, weather does repeat itself, but doesn't get the specifics.
Yeah.
So.
To wrap up, what's the piece that you're the most interested in following this year?
Two things. Okay. Number one, this weak La Nina, it absolutely has to go away, and it looks like it will. It looks like it'll be gone by the time we get into the end of March, and we're already seeing it weaken, so I think that's going to be okay. The other thing is the negative phase of Pacific Decadal Oscillation, which has to do with cool water off the west coast of North America and then much warmer water further west. And in that scenario, we talked about the ridge possibly building up in the middle of North America. That promotes ridginess in the middle of North America in some years, especially years where La Nina sticks around. So if La Nina doesn't go away and we keep this negative PDO in place, the potential for getting a hot, dry scenario in the middle of North America becomes much higher. But I think we're going to lose La Nina, and we're going to get a part of this, but it's not going to be the big bad disaster, I hope, that we've seen in the past. So, but that's what I'm watching most closely right now.
Drew, if somebody wants some information on your newsletter, pitch it. Let's hear about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Go to our website, www.worldweather.cc. Be careful not to go to .com. There is no .com for that's me.
Those imposters.
.cc. Yes, imposters. Or you can call us at 913-2, you can call my my office number, 913-383-1161. Too many phone numbers, sorry.
Drew, thanks a lot for joining us here. Enjoy the rest of Top Producer.
You too. Take care.